Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Colossians, and we're in chapter 1. Today we're going to look at verses 15 through 18. We're really getting into the heart of his theological section, which is in some ways the deepest, at least the most cosmological of his theological sections, in which he talks about Jesus' role in creation, Jesus' role in the universe, in producing life at all, in holding the universe together. We saw him after his hello give two of those introductory sections instead of one. Well, he's going to give us two theological sections instead of one as well, and then he's going to give us a couple of warning sections. Um, um, before he gets into the meat of the false teaching, and then gives them, their life lessons. So there are doublets. There's duplication of sections, and each one develops the one before it. So that's an interesting way that Colossians is not like his other letters. Although we're going to see lots of connections between Colossians and Ephesians, between Colossians and the Gospels, particularly between Colossians and John's writings. So let's read 15 through 18. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. In him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might come to have first place in everything. This is a tight little package of theological truth that has almost too much in it to unpack in 5 minutes or 50 minutes or 5 hours. There's just, or 500 pages of a book. There's just so much here, but it begins and ends by making Jesus the firstborn. Which means first place. It's not a way of saying that Jesus is in any way created. Jesus is God, as John comes straight out and says in John 1:1. The beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Jesus is not created, he's pre existent God, but he's the first. He's the head of everything, he's before all things, and all things are for him. And he's the first when we talk about creation and life, and he's the first when we talk about death and resurrection from the dead. He's the first. He's the first in all things. That's his point, which is exactly what he says at the end of verse 18, that he himself might come to have first place in everything. Everything from life to death. Everything from Alpha to Omega. So that's what this little gem of a section, this theological section, is about. I can only pull these things out of the out of the travel bag and show them to you. I can't really take the time to explain everything. We wouldn't have the time to do this in 5 minutes, let alone 5 weeks. He is the image of the invisible God. Now, that's just something that Paul and the writer of Hebrews and John continues to tell us. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. No one has seen God at any time, but the only begotten from the Father has expressed him to us, because he became flesh and dwelt among us. And he's going to continue to come back to this notion that God is contained in Jesus, and even in the body of Jesus. All that is God is contained in the body of Jesus, something that he'll say in chapter 2. He, we can't experience God apart from Jesus. Jesus is the one who makes God accessible to us. He's the first among all creation. He is the medium of creation. Um, in him, everything that exists exists. Paul will say, John says this in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Paul will say this in Romans, has already said this in the first chapter of Romans. And this doesn't just include the universe that we see, but the entire arc of human history. The fullness of time, everything that's happened in human history has happened to bring about the birth, the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because it's not just the universe that we see, but rulers and authorities and dominions. He's before all things. He's pre-existent. And he's before all things in the sense that he is above all things. And then there's that phrase in verse 17 that explains so much. It's almost like we don't need the Large Hadron Collider in Lucerne, because we have the second half of this verse. And in him all things hold together. Life exists because of Jesus, and life continues to hold together because of Jesus. Jesus explains all of our mysteries, something he's going to say at the end of the first chapter. And that even includes our cosmological mysteries, like how does the universe hold together and not fly apart? How does matter itself even exist? How how do we square the quantum world with the visible world? There's an answer for that. The universe coheres through Jesus Christ. At the smallest level, Jesus' presence, his power permeates all existence, even at the subatomic level, and holds everything together. He's the head of the body, the church. He's going to talk about the church as a body multiple times. And this is something writing at the end of his ministry that they would know from maybe if they got to share the letter to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 4. He talks about it in greater detail. Romans 12. 1 Corinthians 12 is the longest passage where he describes the church as the body. And he's the first one to be, he's the firstborn of the resurrection from the dead. He's not the first person to be resurrected from the dead. There were 5 before his resurrection from the dead. But as Paul will point out in Romans chapter 6, he didn't die again. Everybody else did. He's the one who conquered death and made death irrelevant. Okay. So that's what he has preeminence in everything. And he's going to pick up that thought and continue to talk about that means our sufficiency in verse 19. So we'll pick up there next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.